human rights, civil rights, the right to be safe, the right to have equal opportunities, equal pay, labor rights. These are all things that activists often fight for. You hurt one of us, you hurt all of us. And who's willing to go outside of their own particular experience to help other people? Well, today's guest is that person. Someone from out west, a sports guy, a guy from the queer community, a guy who embraces the Communist Party, someone that taught at Harvard University. And now he's a history professor and a former colleague of mine, Dr. Chris Frazer. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Empathize Others, the podcast. Today, we're going to talk to someone when we talk about activism. And to me, that means being out there, putting yourself out there, being visible, making your voice heard. This is someone that was a colleague of mine when I was at St. X. And right now, it's when I do this podcast, I think about community people and people that are passionate about community. And this person kept coming to my mind, and I'm glad to have them with us today. It's Dr. Chris Frazer, who's a history professor at St. Francis Xavier University, someone I consider a friend, and someone who I've learned a lot from. And I really, again, really appreciate what you bring to the table as far as community. And this is exactly what the podcast is about. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Augy. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's I always get excited when I have guests on because I'm very purposeful about who I think fits, and I think you're a perfect fit because the people that have been listening to the podcast are getting it from a community angle, right? How can I do it? What does it look like when you're doing? I wouldn't even say it's volunteer work, but you're doing work outside of your own circle. And you do that a lot. And so I want to circle all the way back to the beginning. And so I know that you're from out west. So talk about what is the community that you come from? Like when you say that brought you up, what's the community that brought you up?
Well, certainly, there was the community I grew up in Calgary, and it's just basically one square block of houses, and in those days Calgary was small enough to feel like a small town that way. So you knew everybody that you grew up with, and every mom on the block looked after the kids when you were out, and when you were in trouble, they all made sure your mom knew about it. So that was the first. But I'd also say, actually, that's the second. The first one is my immediate family and the extended family. Yeah. They come from a pretty humble background, and when we were being raised, they made sure that we always knew the stories about our family's history. So for them, it was very, very important to know who you are and where you come from and where this is going to take you on your life. So it's not something that you grow up and leave behind. It's just something you carry with you once you become an adult. And so family, both on the West Coast and in Calgary, were right at the core. And they still are in lots of ways.
That's interesting too, Chris. I think that, there's this lineage that you talk about. So community goes beyond, like your family's telling you, you're Chris Frazer, and this is what it means to be that person. So that's cool that the community that you're talking about has a intergenerational piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, the stories that I was raised on are always stories about struggle, about trying to get ahead, trying to better the circumstances of your life. So, my great-grandparents were immigrants. They homesteaded on the prairies. They got busted out, ended up in logging camps on the West Coast. And so it was always just about doing whatever you could to make a better life for the kids you're raising. And so that, I think, that spirit of doing things in the community, with the community, starts right there. So
yeah, that's a great start, because everyone that we've had on the show, on the podcast, you start to see as we go through the time, how everything links together, like your early
yep,
sense of community. And then, because I don't think anything, same with me and how I grew up, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from the time I was a small boy. Community was same as you grew up. Community was the stories, the talk, the kitchen table
yep,
talk, the people that came to the house. And so that's and also that the struggle, the sufferation of the community. Like there are these
yep,
stories of we're a people that are resilient, and we'll get to that. But you've always really, to me, when I look at the history of the things that you've done, you support people who struggle. That's what
yep,
I find, right?
yep.
So as you are from a little boy to becoming you're now becoming a youth. Um, how is this vision of your home community? Because you're very much talking about how it was in the house.
Yeah.
Now spread it out to you're going to school, you're playing sports. At this time, I think you're playing hockey and lacrosse, right?
Yes. And
And so
football.
now, and football. So now,
Yeah.
what does community? How does that spread out your notion of community?
Uh, well, you become an adolescent and then everything gets really complicated. Doesn't matter. so, so now you're trying to find your place in the world all over again, and you're in the system. So you're going to school, and some of the friends you hang out with are people you grew up with. Some of them are new ones, and I think what happens then is that you gravitate towards people who have something in common with you.
Uh,
Um, Sometimes it's purposeful, sometimes it's just kind of accidental. And for me, the trick was that I had several different communities as a young man, a teenager. Um, there were those who I played sports with, and that was an experience all to itself. I think that actually was probably the first time I ever really experienced something that tight knit that wasn't kinship. But because you had to have each other's back if you're going to perform well. And I learned that. I played for championship teams.
yeah,
And the only way you get there is by pushing yourself to be the best, but within the context of a team.
yeah,
You're a piece of a whole. And it doesn't matter who you are. Some guys are always better than others, but you have a role to play. And if you all do that consciously and with discipline, then you will succeed. So that was, I think, the important lesson that came to me out of sports was
yes.
was how to be an individual within a collective and to make the two work together.
And we
So
share
that,
that, Chris. I do want
yeah,
to, because I want you to go on, but the sports thing I want to come in on a second, because that's an interesting piece for me, because I felt the exact same way. I also played sports, and I had this activist family, right?
yeah,
But I learned things through sports that actually informed my activism. And I think that
yeah,
you make that connection too, is that same, I'm a part of a team. And if I play
yeah,
my role, we can win a championship.
yeah.
I think that also goes into the work that you do as the community work, the activist work.
Absolutely right. So even this is when I started my work with X Pride as a faculty advisor. This was really one of the first things that I had to continually drive home because we all bring in the culture we grow up in a very strong sense of individualism, and so your concern first of all is going to be for your own rights as an individual.
Yes.
But as individuals, we can't actually effectively defend our rights by ourselves. None of us is strong enough. So you have
Uh,
to find a community to work with you. And at X, this was the first thing that the LGBTQ community had to do, was to find a way to not just struggle for yourself, but to understand that that your struggle is only going to succeed if you're doing that alongside others who face the same oppression. Uh, so be less selfish, be more giving, and what you find is that you actually get more back in the end.
Yeah, and
that approach.
that informs your connection to communism as well, which we'll get into. So as you're in Calgary, then too, let's talk about adolescence, and then
Yeah.
there's an identity, and I know that your aunt had an influence on you on being yourself, and you
Yep.
being proud
Yep.
about being yourself.
Yep.
And so talk a little bit about your aunt and how she helped you
Yeah.
in identifying another community that you were a part of.
Yeah. This was one of the hardest challenges of being a teenager, actually, because this was in the 1970s, man, and there was no visible queer community to be part of, and
Yes.
there was nobody to go to as a mentor, so you're stuck trying to figure all this stuff out by yourself, and you're perfectly aware of the prejudice that exists in the communities to which you belong. So it
Yeah.
was really, really prevalent in the sports community, and so this was one challenge for me: was how to be myself, but still find a way to be a member of that team, that collective. But you always
Yeah.
worry if you're going to be outed. Um, so you're caught between wanting to be who you are, and part of that is being an athlete.
Yes.
But you don't feel like you can fully disclose everything about yourself, because then you might get excluded.
Yeah.
So and that's always been a problem for me. I have a problem with keeping my mouth shut sometimes, Augie, because it just gets to me after a while, and I got to spit it
That's a
out.
superpower
Um,
too, though, Chris. That's a superpower, man.
it is. It has gotten me into trouble, and it has gotten me out of trouble too. um, uh, so it was a long time before I could even find a way to talk about all of this. But my aunt was her example was something that kind of kept that candle burning for me. Um,
Hmm.
she came out as a lesbian about 1960, 1961 in a mill town on Vancouver Island, which is a pretty tough place to do it anyways.
Yes.
Uh, so I always really admired her courage and her sense of self-confidence in knowing who she is.
Yes.
And that helped me much later when I did come out to my own parents, and she was very good about giving me a strategy for how to do that. That was going
Hmm.
to help my parents listen rather than be defensive. And the other thing about that was the example of my grandmother on my mom's side. When my aunt Sandra came out, my grandmother called the family together and said, "I don't really care what your opinion is. It's family, and you pull together. And
Yes.
Sandra is who she is, and and there's not a thing that you can say or do that's going to change that. So your only choice is, are you part of the family, or are you not part of the family? And
That's
if you're
great
in the
leadership
family,
from a
yeah,
matriarchal
yeah.
point of view. That's
Well,
great.
she's
And the other thing,
yeah,
the thing that comes up too, Chris, for me is now you're talking about these clashing of communities. So you had a community
yeah,
of lacrosse, hockey,
yeah,
football, which is very physical, athletics. And we even know in our time frame right now, it's difficult for athletes to come out as
mm-hmm,
queer. And this is like 40 years later, 50 years later.
yeah,
So at the time I could see where there'd be this real struggle and now tension amongst communities from your
yeah,
home community to the
yeah,
community that you are and who you want to hang out with and who you're attracted to and those things. And then also the sports community, which you love. You've been
yep,
on championship teams. You're a part of these teams, and also kind of speaks to, I don't know if this makes sense, but you're very intersectional, right? I find you can
yeah.
you can move in a lot of different spaces. Is that does that connect back to that time when you realized I've got to be versatile to be able to bounce in and out of these different communities?
So I got to say, there's two things about that, Augie. One is exactly what you said. It's the experience of having to navigate significantly different communities that are fundamental in your life. So I did have, I was part of the drama kids and kind of like the geeky kids, but I was also part of the jocks. And so somehow you find a way to belong.
Mm-hmm.
And really the key is that you just have to understand what earns respect in those communities. And in both instances, really, it's about the extent to which people can rely on you.
Good point.
Are you a reliable person? And if you are, then what I've learned is that 9 times out of 10, people are going to start to overlook what they dislike about you, because we all got something we don't like about somebody.
Yeah.
But if you're reliable and if you're stand up, actually, if you show up to the game every time, then some of that stuff, even if people don't like it, don't matter anymore, because you become part of what makes the success happen. And that just opens up minds, I think, and it makes people question some of the prejudices they might have. But you got to be the example, and you gotta carry that and struggle for their respect and show up always.
It's a great point. Great point.
So that's the first thing. And the second thing is coming into politics in the early 1980s. One of the first movements I got involved in was the struggle against apartheid in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always really captured by one of the slogans that was common. And it was, an injury to one is an injury to all.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the lesson I take from this is about the intersectionality, Augy. If there's somebody who's struggling because they're oppressed or discriminated against, even if it's not for reasons that are the same as the experiences I have, just common sense tells me that their humanity is under assault, and that's the thing we have in common. And if somebody can attack their humanity for reasons of color or your ethnicity or whatever, one day it's going to be my turn. So you got to step up now and not just wait for the haters to come to you. You got to dig in your heels, right? And get at it now. So
and you speak about human rights, and I said this on a podcast previously around, my dad's Rocky Jones, and he did work around civil rights, and I always thought civil rights to me was that narrow. When I was young, I thought it was Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee and NAACP and all these things. But when my dad passed away, and I said this, like, the people that came out to his funeral was this whole mix of people that he touched, and then this light bulb went on. It was like, oh, you mean civil rights are rights of civilians?
Yeah,
they're human rights, and that's exactly what you're talking about. It doesn't have to be in my own narrow experience, because, as you said quite rightly, one person that's getting beat down, it's going to circle back to you at some point. So, it's that. So I love that you brought that up, Chris, because that is really a kernel of why we do activist work, why we go out of our way to help people that are not, like, we're not even in their situation, but we're going to march, we're going to be involved, because an injury to one is an injury to all.
Yep. It would be really easy for me because I'm really privileged in lots of ways, Augy, because of my skin color, because of my sex, my gender. And it would be really easy for me to just kind of not see stuff, but it just doesn't make any sense to me.
So let's go forward now in this kind of timeline. So in that sense of defending others and feeling others, how did you get to studying Latin America at Brown University, and being connected to Mexico, Cuba, and that? What was your interest in that? How did you lead to that?
I'm going to say that there were two things really. One was that I was getting very interested in the 1980s with the events that were happening south of us. So the revolution in Nicaragua, there was a civil war in El Salvador. I had met refugees from Chile after the military takeover. So there were lots of issues that touched on my life that had to do with people I knew from Latin America. So I just became interested in what was going on.
Yes.
And then there were also lots of solidarity movements in support of the peoples in those countries. So I had some interest and some knowledge. But when I went to university, that wasn't going to be my principal focus. I wanted to be a Canadian historian. I wanted to especially become an expert in the history of labor unions in Canada, actually, the history of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to my fourth year, and there were just a number of circumstances that conspired to all suddenly change my course of studies. And one of them just had to do with one of the realities of the academy, and that's that sometimes there are conflicts between individuals that just can't be resolved, and it's just better not to engage in them. And long and the short of it is that the guy who would have supervised me at the University of Calgary is a guy that I couldn't have gotten along with, so I had to make a switch. And so it was the summer before I was supposed to go into grad school, so I just had to make a really quick decision. And I literally flipped a coin, landed in my palm, and it was Latin American history.
Wow. Wow.
So that summer I taught myself Spanish because I had to write a language test in September. So I had 4 months to learn Spanish.
Crazy.
And I did that. And then I just decided that I was going to work my ass off, and I got top marks, and that was enough to get me a scholarship from the Canadian government so that I could go to grad school at Brown. But honestly, this is kind of just luck, yeah. But it was a good break for me, because then that introduced me to a whole other world of politics. I got to live in the United States for a while and become a lot more familiar with the struggles for social justice there, because it was pretty hot in the late 90s. It was really hot, like politically. So,
and you were at Brown, so you did graduate work at Brown.
I did my graduate work at Brown.
It seems to me too is that there is this, Carl Jung talks about synchronicity. I think that there's a synchronicity to people who struggle. So the Latin American switch, and obviously there were labor unions, so they're similar, but that switch has a thread of going back to you as a little boy and talking about, our family are strugglers, and this is how you're resilient. And so the Latin American study it's a flip of a coin, yes, literally, but it's still connected to your life force.
Sure.
Right? Your life journey.
Yeah. And especially the themes that I chose to pick up in researching and teaching Latin American history. In a lot of ways, it was really quite lucky, because being trained to be a historian of Latin America meant that I had to become pretty well educated in the struggles of Afro-Latinos, for example, the issues that the experience with slavery, the experience with racism, and the exploitation that happens in Latin America, the struggles of indigenous people to try and hang on to their cultures and to survive an invasion and an occupation. So all of that I never really would have learned in the way that I have. And that's now reflected also in the way that I teach. These are the histories that I want to teach. The histories of people who actually produce the wealth but don't get anything back from it except a lot of misery. So that's one piece of it, and it also began to influence my political practice too. I was always very interested in the labor movement and in the gay rights movement, but suddenly, because of my training as a historian, this elevated my awareness of how central issues of race and issues of indigenous sovereignty are to us also. So it has become a bigger part of my life now that I'm at St. FX.
Yeah, and so a couple of questions, because again, your life that you've lived intrigues me, and I think it's a great story for this podcast, because it does talk about how community and activism weaves into our lives, almost like we were destined to do it. Like I think about young Chris Frazer, and then when you're now at Brown University, you're in the States, and then you also spent some time teaching at Harvard, and so. We think about Harvard is this of academia.
It is.
What was it like? And you were teaching, history of Cuba and history of Mexico. What was that like at Harvard?
It was just surreal. There was never a slight millisecond in my whole previous life that ever led me to believe that I would end up at Harvard. This was just so unbelievable for me. So a couple of things about it is that one, I discovered that that part of it is just about being connected. So you get to Harvard. Who goes to Harvard? People who have certain social status and who have certain connections. And how does a grad student like me end up at Harvard? Well, because the guy running the program that I was hired into was a Brown graduate. And so they have all of these connections with each other. And so they make those things happen. So I got kind of swept up in that little, in that stream for a while. On the other hand, what is also apparent is that you have a remarkable amount of resources at your disposal to teach with.
Good point.
I had resources available to me that I'm still struggling to acquire as a matter of course at St. FX. And I don't think it's any different at any public university here in Canada, not just St. FX. It's just that Harvard has just this enormous amount of wealth, and it gives you the luxury of being able to do a lot, and you can maximize your teaching. So I did. I squeezed it for all it was worth, and it was a great education. But it was pretty intimidating too, because this is not, Harvard is not, will never be my community. I worked there. I liked the people I met, but that's a whole different world. And honestly, I just never really felt very comfortable in it. And so when the opportunity to apply for a job came up, I did so. And when St. FX offered me a job, I said, hell yeah, I'm coming to Canada. I'm coming back home. So Harvard was great. And I'm pretty sure it helped get me a job at St. FX too.
But, well, that's nice on your CV. That's nice.
Pretty nice.
So what year did you start at St. FX?
2004.
Okay.
And, I came to St. FX and I was going to be really well behaved, Augy. I wasn't going to chirp anybody. I wasn't going to complain about nothing. I was just going to keep my head down and work and do my job and get my tenure. And then I was going to get loud and obnoxious. It just didn't work out that way. It happened a lot more quickly than I expected.
So to that order, you come and you obviously teaching history, but then you're also connected to the LGBTQ plus students, and you become the faculty advisor and really, this is where you and I later on we connect. But early on when you were doing that, and I know Agnes Calise was doing some of that same work with the students of African ancestry at the time. I know it was a hard fight for her, right? To try to think about, and we're not going to, I don't want to get too deep into the atmosphere, but the atmosphere at X is very much around perpetuating the status quo, who has an X ring, that type of thing. And so when you're talking about queer and trans students in the 2000s, what made you, because it seems like before you got tenure, you wanted to keep it safe. Well, you saying that you want to be the faculty advisor for the queer and trans students, that's not a safe position to take.
Nope, it wasn't. So this is where all of the moral foundations of the communities that raised me came to the fore. What's the right thing to do, Chris? Be safe or be true to yourself. And what triggered it was the atmosphere at St. FX. And I will say a little, this is not about criticizing St. FX. It's just that this is the reality of what it was at the time. And so it could be pretty misogynist, it could be pretty racist, it could be pretty homophobic. It's just, and that's not just saying, that was in general still. I mean, gay marriage was still brand new. People were still having a hard time. So it's no surprise. In any event, there was a gay bashing on campus in November of that year, which I think was also a racist attack. There's a student from the Caribbean who got beaten up, and he also happened to be gay. So both. That was also, by the way, another lesson in intersectionality. How do you separate out which hatred it was? It was both. He was a black gay kid, and so we got the snot kicked out of him. So we had a protest on campus, and that's when I realized that the game is real here. And then I think it was probably January or so, Andrew Murray got bashed too. Andrew is now the first out town councillor in Nova Scotia. But so I just thought, if I'm going to survive, if I'm going to live in this community, I can't put my head down.
Good point.
So I have to make this a place I can live. And I can't do it by myself, so I need people to come with me. And that meant looking for allies, looking for friends. And the first place I started to look was somebody like Agnes Callist, to be honest. Agnes was great with me. And I think, I got where she was coming from, and she understood where I was coming from. And we're both pretty dedicated to the students we're supposed to advise. But in any event, what happens then is St. FX comes to me and says, we need to take this in hand and we need to do something. And what we'd like to do is do for the queer kids what Agnes is doing for the Black students on campus. Mm-hmm. So I said, I think that's a great idea. I will step up and I will do this because it works for me. It is an instrument I can use to change Antigonish a bit so that I can actually live here and be comfortable. And it will also help my students to survive their experience at St. FX. So that was just the beginning of it, Augy. And that just meant that, hey, you're out now. So you don't have any choice except to run with it and to bring as many people along as you can. So, and that's the second point I'll make. And that's people ain't going to come with you if you aren't showing up for their fights either. So you have to face your own. And the only reason people will come with you is if they see you standing up for their stuff too. So that's
a great point about intersectionality, though, too, Chris, because if you go outside of your way to support a movement that you're not really a part of, then more likely when something's happening to you personally, those same people will come on your side, right? But if you're only present for your own fight, so let's say you only advocate for the queer and trans community, if that's all you did, then your let's say your value or your credibility outside of that would be, and you are very versatile. So you do have credibility in many different spaces or communities. I do want to talk about a couple things before we run out of time here, because I could talk to you forever, but
we're burning the barn.
So when, and I know that you're involved with the Canadian Communist Party, and you actually ran in two federal elections, if I'm correct. You were the president of the Canadian Communist Party. So is this something that happened when you came back at St. FX, and that was something that you got linked to, or were you already involved with that before you started in 2004 at X?
I've been a member of the Communist Party since 1980, Augy. Yes. I joined when I was 21, and I've been a member ever since. Mm-hmm. So I joined in Alberta, which is not the most radical place in the world. So I don't know how I do know how I got there, but that's a whole other story. It's just that I've been around it for a while, and I became the leader of the Young Communist League, the youth section, actually, between 1985 and 1990, and then. Then school. And then when I moved to the States, I actually joined the party in the United States as well. So I did some organizing there, which is where I got my experience doing union organizing, actually, and that was as a member of the Communist Party in the U.S. And I just kept going. I returned to the Canadian Party when I got here in 2004. So I was very relatively well known, and I'd run in elections in Alberta and in Toronto. So Antigonish wasn't my first time, but it was a first time for a communist to run in Antigonish.
Yes, yes.
But, there's even links here. There's a party organization I belong to in Antigonish. We call ourselves the J.B. McLaughlin Club. J.B. McLaughlin was the organizer of the coal miners in Cape Breton and a founding member of the Communist Party. And those roots go pretty deep. It's just that they don't really, the history isn't very well known. So,
Yes.
yeah. So, and I'm in the Communist Party because I'm a socialist. I believe that we need a society that's based not on exploitation but on sharing, on cooperation rather than competition, and making sure that everybody's basic needs and human rights are met. So,
Well, yeah, and that
that's the
makes
short.
sense, Chris, because as we now, over the last, half an hour or so, that we're getting to know your upbringing, and it's almost like a seed that grows into a plant, or a tree, you can now see the tree. Like, so to say that those principles, so you ran on a platform of less hours in the work week, a higher minimum wage, retirement age that's reasonable, which means you have to bump up the pension, university tuition down,
Yeah.
corporate taxes up. Like, these are not, people can frame them as communism, but they're people concepts, right?
It's funny, I was at a debate during this election on the Eastern Passage, I guess. So I spoke, and it was all of the candidates. There were 7 of us, and I got no short. All kinds of people came up to me afterwards, and they said, "Are you sure this is the Communist Party?" And I said, "Yep, this is what we believe in. I don't know what you think about it, but this is what we believe in." And then somebody said to me, "Well, if you were running for somebody else, you'd probably win." And I'd say, "Yeah, but I'd also lose my principles too." So,
uh,
it's not just about winning the election. It's about advocating for some solutions to the problems we face. And so, whatever hesitations, I know people have some hesitations about communism in the party and stuff. What the most important thing is the issues that I'm trying to bring and trying to raise and organizing around. I'm not going to win an election, but I will be organizing in the community around those issues. So.
Yeah, and that speaks to the true essence of activism, does it not? It's not about winning.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about
No.
winning. It's being present. It's showing up. It's putting your
Yeah.
voice in the mix, and it's actually putting your neck out there, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're usually going out and speaking on behalf of people that don't have a voice, and so
Yep.
that's what I learned. That's what I learned growing up. So now, to
Yep.
that end, this is where, and I am going to make sure I put this picture up, but Priscilla, Queen of the Highlands. So so the drag show that you have at St. X
Yeah.
started in 2005, which is a year after you were there. And again,
Yep.
it's to support. And I do want to know the history of it, but I will say that,
Yeah.
I have this story I tell between you and I that, when I was there, you go, "Yeah, oh, yeah, you're coming out to the show." And I was like, "I don't know, Chris, And then the next day, there's a ticket on my desk, right? So you made sure I was going, right?
Yeah,
And
because I
then
knew you'd have
when
a
I
good
went,
time, man.
no, it was perfect.
Yeah.
You met me there, and that's where I met, Celia Cruz, and you made me
Yep.
feel
Yeah.
wanted and comfortable. And I often use that as an example, Chris, to say we have to go out of our comfort zone in order to learn.
Yeah.
And that I went out
Yeah.
of my comfort zone that night, and I learned so much. You gave me the history. You let me know why this happens, why that happens. We shared a drink. You got on stage. You
Yep.
performed. Like, there was so much that happened. So think about, so now, let me see, 2005. So now you've been doing that for, do the math, that's 16
17
years.
16 years, yeah.
Talk about,
This is our
yeah,
16th year.
so talk about what that Priscilla, Queen of the Highlands drag queen show, why you organized it, and how it has advocacy in it.
So there were 2 reasons for starting it. The first one was that there were no spaces for queer people to go to socialize, to relax, to visit. Not a bar, not a lounge, not a coffee house. And I think this is really vital for building any kind of community around. If you have, there has to be some center for it, whether it's a church, whether it's an event, whether it's a community hall. There has to be a center for that community where people can come together, even if it's just for having a coffee and a beer or just to talk about what happened in your day. But you have to, and it has to be a safe place. You have to feel like you can belong there no matter what. So that's what Priscilla was, because there was nothing, especially for students at St. FX. You couldn't go somewhere with a date. You couldn't go there without having to look over your shoulder, walking down the street to Piper's, that kind of stuff. So So Priscilla was supposed to be that. It was the one night out of the year it could be our house, and we could be safe. We could be who we wanted. Okay. And we wanted our friends and allies to be there too. And because they were going to come, we wanted to work our asses off to entertain people and make sure it's a good time and a very positive atmosphere. So the second thing, that when we realized that there was an audience for it, because it has sold out every year, we fill up the room no matter what. And
it was jam packed when I was there, like standing room.
400 people. Yeah, 400 people in that room, man. It's just I'm getting chills. And the other thing was that St. FX was, even though they had appointed me, they weren't giving me that much money for my programming. And so this was a fundraiser initially for the advising program. Mm-hmm. So that supported the programming. And that kind of was beautiful because it was the community turning up to put their money in the coffer. And I was giving them a good show in exchange. I don't believe in getting your money for nothing. You're donating, you're getting something for your money. So, and you're going to get that show. And it's become that. And we have people coming from across the province now for Priscilla. And I pinch myself that it's still going, to be perfectly honest.
Well, this is a great way to wrap up, Chris, because I admire a lot of the ways that you work and the integrity that you have, and I'm so happy to be connected to you because I think you set an example of what it means to be out there, and when I say out there is community work is often it's very comfortable to stay home, and it's very comfortable to press like or to type something on Facebook, or that's comfortable. What's not comfortable is running in an election, creating a drag queen show, bringing out the history of Latin American culture and oppression from a history point of view. These are all not, even obviously, being someone that brings out the history of the queer movement, including the T-shirt you have on now. Those are all things that. Yeah, man, they take courage. And I appreciate your courage. I appreciate your intelligence. And I really want to thank you for sharing your story with me and with the people that, take in this podcast, because there's a lot of beautiful nuggets in your story around community and activism. And if you hurt one, you hurt us all. And I really love that connection.
Well, thanks, Augy. I really appreciate the opportunity you're giving me to amplify the voice and the message. And hopefully, if it helps somebody in moving their struggles along, everything's worth it. So, and I really admire the work that you do, and you're continuing an important legacy in your own way, man. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, brother.
Right on.
Thanks for watching this episode of Empathize Others, the podcast. We hope that you really enjoyed the show. If you're enjoying the podcast series overall, as much as we enjoy making it, make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow, and when you subscribe, you'll know right away when our new episodes are released.